On a September morning, Diana Hale walked into a small garage on the outskirts of Richmond with a folder tucked under her arm and the kind of eyes that had already settled on a number before seeing the car. Isaac Mercer said nothing. He stood beside a tarped Corvette, hands dark with engine grease, and waited. Diana lifted the cover, made a few notes, then set a single sheet of paper on the workbench. $700. $700 for the car he had spent 8 years keeping alive. Isaac had not yet spoken when the garage door opened a second time. Subscribe now. The story of this Corvette and the quiet man standing beside it does not end here. The sign above Mercer Auto had not been repainted in years. The letters had faded to the color of old chalk against a background of peeling white, and the building itself, a low cinder-block rectangle on a 2-lane road south of the city, looked like the kind of place that survived on reputation rather than appearance. Which was, in fact, exactly how it survived. The interior was different. The concrete floor was stained in the way that only decades of honest work can stain concrete, not with neglect but with use, and the tool racks along the back wall were organized with a precision that would have surprised anyone expecting chaos. 3 ramps, 2 lifts, a rolling cabinet with 47 drawers. Everything in its place, and every place known by feel in the dark. Isaac Mercer had turned 33 in July and had not celebrated it in any way he could name. He was built lean from labor rather than exercise, his dark hair overdue for a cut, and there was a small scar on the back of his left hand, a thin white line running from the knuckle of his ring finger toward his wrist, that he had never explained to anyone who asked and that no one had asked about in years. He was under the hood of a 1969 Mustang when the morning started, working a valve stem that had been torqued wrong by someone who had learned from a video and who had also, based on the evidence now in front of Isaac, applied the same misplaced confidence to 3 of the surrounding components. Isaac was correcting each one in sequence, not because the customer had asked him to, but because he was not capable of leaving a thing half right. He worked without music. The only sound in the garage was whatever the engine gave back when he asked a question of it. That was the thing people who dealt with Isaac noticed first. He never hurried, even when the situation seemed to demand it, especially then. In the far corner of the garage, separated from the working bays by 10 feet of open floor, sat a car under a gray canvas tarp. The shape beneath the cover was unmistakable to anyone who knew the curves of a C-body Corvette. The long hood, the flared rear quarters, the low roofline, but the tarp had never been lifted in front of a customer. A man named Gerald, who brought his Silverado in twice a year for service, had once offered $4,500 for whatever was under there. Isaac had looked at him once and then looked back at the engine he was working on, and the subject had not come up again. Isaac had kept the car since the winter of 2019, in the way you keep something left to you by the one person who shaped the part of your life you don't discuss in casual conversation. Walter Finch had died on a Tuesday in November, in a hospital room in Charlotte where the blinds were half open and the afternoon light came in at a low angle across the floor. He had left no formal will, no notarized transfer, no document of any kind. He had left a set of keys on the bedside table and said, the last time the 2 of them had spoken while he was still himself. When you understand why it matters, you'll know what to do with it. Isaac had not touched the car for 6 months after that. He had driven past the storage unit where it was sitting, twice on different weeknights, without stopping, before he finally went in and moved it. When he finally removed the original tarp and replaced it with the gray canvas, he did not look at the car for long. He covered it back up the same afternoon. That was 3 years ago, and nothing had changed, except the bills on the desk near the door. 3 months behind on the lease, 2 calls from the landlord. And now a black company sedan pulling up outside. Diana Hale was 27 and had closed 9 acquisition deals in the past 14 months, which was 3 more than the previous record holder at Apex Motor Group's regional division. She dressed for meetings the way a chess player opens a game, everything chosen in advance. Nothing left to chance. Navy blazer, white blouse, low heels comfortable enough for fieldwork, a tablet case that doubled as a portfolio. She shook hands with a grip that was firm without performing firmness and introduced herself in 2 sentences. Her name, her company, her purpose. She had been told the target was a 1969 Corvette C3 in unknown condition, located in a garage with financial difficulties and an owner who had twice declined written correspondence. She had been told to assess, offer, and close. She had done harder things on less preparation. Isaac set down the wrench he was holding and watched her walk toward him. He did not offer his hand first. He let her offer hers, shook it once, and said nothing. She had prepared for resistance, for negotiation, for the emotional attachment people develop around old cars. She had not prepared for silence. Diana asked to see the vehicle. Isaac walked her to the corner without speaking, reached down for the edge of the canvas, and folded it back. The paint was a deep red that had faded and oxidized the way decades do to untreated lacquer. Still the ghost of its original color, but muted like a voice heard through a wall. The chrome on the front bumper was lifting at two corners. The driver's seat leather had split along a horizontal seam and curled back on itself. The passenger window carried a crack that had been there long enough to develop a faint amber tinge from UV exposure. Diana took photographs from 8 angles, noted measurements, typed into her tablet. Her stylus moved at the pace of someone executing a rehearsed process, and the process looked thorough if you did not know what thorough actually looked like. Isaac stood 3 feet back and watched without expression. Diana set her tablet face down on the workbench, opened the portfolio, and placed a single typed sheet beside it. The number sat in the center of the page, clean and alone, $700. She explained it in the tone of someone delivering a fair and slightly reluctant conclusion. Structural rust along the rear chassis rails. Non-original transmission based on registration history, incomplete title documentation. The offer reflected current assessed condition and the cost of remediation. Isaac looked at the page, then at the car, then at Diana without hostility, without frustration, with the exact quality of attention a person gives to something they are genuinely trying to understand. He said, "Do you know what this car is?" Diana said what she had been given to say. A 1969 C3 in need of full restoration. The offer reflected the actual condition. Isaac did not argue. He did not negotiate. He set the sheet back down on the workbench gently, the way you set down a book you have already read, and walked back to the Mustang. Diana stood at the workbench for a moment with the typed sheet in front of her and the sound of a wrench resuming work behind her. She had never had someone decline with such complete absence of drama. It was, she thought, more unsettling than anger would have been. She stepped outside through the side door and called Jason Brandt. He answered on the second ring, which was how he always answered when he was waiting. She told him the offer had been made and the owner had not signed. Jason interrupted before she could continue. He was not surprised. He had expected the first visit to land without a signature. That was the design. The 700 was not a real number. He explained in the measured tone of someone stating policy they had already decided was sound. It was a pressure point, meant to sit in the man's head for a week alongside the rent he couldn't pay. She would go back in 7 days, and the number on the page would look like relief instead of an insult. Diana asked if the company was certain about the vehicle's identity. Jason said the casting number on the block did not lie. Apex had verified through a third-party broker in Atlanta, a man who moved in circles where information like this traveled quietly. The car in that garage matched the block number on a document from a 1987 IMSA technical inspection. If it was what it appeared to be, it was worth more than the building Isaac Mercer was renting. Diana said nothing for a moment. She was standing in the narrow gravel strip between the garage wall and the road, and through the long rectangular window beside the side door she could see Isaac at work, soles of his boots and the lower portion of his legs, perfectly still in the way that people are still when concentrating on something small. $700. For something worth more than the building. She had done enough deals to understand the language beneath the language. She had started at Apex 2 years ago because she was fast and the automotive acquisition field moved in ways she understood intuitively. She had learned to read a room before entering it, to price sentiment into an offer, to find the moment when resistance was about to become acceptance. She had not before this morning stopped to locate the exact line where that skill became something else. She told Jason she would stay a while longer and assess the situation. He said to use her judgment, which was what he said when he meant, close this and stop overthinking. She did not get back into her car. The truck that pulled up at 11:47 was a Ram 1500 dark gray, with a small enclosed trailer behind it. Nothing about it announced itself. It was the kind of vehicle that moves through the world without asking to be noticed, and the two men who stepped out of it moved the same way. The taller one was in his early 60s, silver hair cut close, a face shaped by weather, not beaten by it but formed by it, the way certain faces become more themselves with age rather than less. He wore a flannel shirt in dark blue and moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had spent decades in environments where wasted motion cost time he didn't have. Diana, who had been reviewing notes near her car, looked up when the truck door closed and felt something shift in her recognition before she could name what she was recognizing. The shorter man had salt and pepper stubble, wire-rimmed glasses, and carried a weathered canvas bag over one shoulder with the relaxed grip of someone who had carried it for years. He walked with his eyes moving around the garage exterior the way a person looks at a place they haven't seen in a long time, quietly checking what has changed. Isaac came out before they reached the door. He stood at the threshold, hands at his sides, and for the first time that morning his face moved into something that was not quite neutral, not surprise, but something more layered, the expression of a man confronting a part of his past that he had not forgotten but had learned to keep in a particular place. The tall man stopped a few feet away and said Isaac's name, not as a question, not as a conventional greeting. The way you say a name when you are confirming something you already knew to be true. Isaac said Cameron. Diana set her tablet down against the door of her car. She knew the name Cameron Reed the way anyone in automotive acquisition knew it, from catalog entries, from historical footnotes in race records, from the documentation she had reviewed in preparation for this assignment without fully absorbing what it represented in human terms. 2 IMSA GT Championships 1987 and 89. A name on the short list of every serious discussion of the era. This was not a collector showing up to browse. The shorter man, Adrian, shook hands briefly and then looked past both of them into the garage, toward the thing he had come for. He set his bag on the workbench and opened it carefully, removing a plastic-sheathed document sleeve. Cameron walked to the far corner and stood in front of the gray tarp. He did not ask permission. He stood there the way a person stands in front of something they have thought about for a long time. Then quietly, "It's still here." The 3 words carried more weight than they contained. Isaac said nothing. Adrian placed a photograph on the workbench beside the document sleeve, black and white, high contrast clearly from a professional camera. A Corvette in race trim on what was unmistakably a starting grid, number 24 on the door panel, the paint and bodywork configuration exactly matching the shape under the tarp in the corner. The photo was dated February 2, 1987. Cameron turned from the tarp and looked at Isaac. "We heard someone was trying to buy it for scrap price." The sentence landed in the silence of the garage and stayed there. Diana, standing near the door, looked at the floor. Isaac said, "Come look at the engine." Adrian Cole had spent 31 years working on racing engines before retiring, and he approached the Corvette's engine bay the way a physician approaches a patient whose case history he has memorized. He removed the hood pins himself, lifted the hood in a single practiced motion, and then stood back and looked without touching. The engine was an L88. Not the production variant, the designation appeared in no manufacturer's catalog for that model year, because the version in front of him had not come from a catalog. The block casting number was 3946074. Adrian said it aloud without checking anything, because he had not needed to check it since 1987. He pointed to the valve assembly and explained what he was pointing at in the tone of a teacher who no longer needs to perform authority. Walter Finch had modified the timing cut by hand, working from calculations done on paper and verified over 4 track sessions. No machine shop, no outside consultant. The modification was not documented anywhere because Walter had not wanted it documented. He did not trust documentation the way he trusted the sound of an engine running right. This was one of 3 cars built specifically for the championship campaign that year. The second had been destroyed in a crash at Road Atlanta in 1989. The driver walked away, but the car did not. The third had passed through 4 ownership changes in the 1990s, and its current location was unknown to everyone Adrian had spoken with in the past decade. The car in front of them was the only surviving example that could be verified against original documentation. Adrian unfolded the document sleeve. Inside was a laminated copy of the post-race technical inspection certificate from Daytona, dated February 2, 1987. Frame number, engine number, inspector's signature. He set it beside the photograph on the workbench, placing his hand flat near both without covering them, the gesture of a man presenting evidence he has waited a long time to present. Diana had moved closer without fully deciding to. She was looking at the inspection certificate, at the number in the engine field, and she was doing the arithmetic she did not want to do but could not stop. Jason had known. He had the broker's research. He had the casting number. He had known the morning she walked in here with that typed sheet of paper exactly what she was carrying. Cameron pulled a folded sheet from his shirt pocket, not a copy, an original, the paper soft from years of careful handling, and laid it on the workbench. It was a handwritten service note from 1987, in the same blue ink that ran throughout the logbook Isaac had not yet shown them. The frame number matched. The engine number matched. The inspector's initials matched the certification. Adrian spoke to Diana without looking at her, his voice even. A comparable Corvette C3 in race configuration, without documentation, without provenance, without a surviving paper trail, had cleared $290,000 at auction in 2021. This car had the original logbook, the technical certificate, a complete chain of custody through one of the engineers who built it, and was the last known surviving example of a specific championship-winning variant. No serious auction house would place the floor below $380,000. The ceiling was a conversation that depended on which room you put it in. Isaac listened to all of it. He had known the car had value in the way you know something a person you trusted once told you was important without telling you how important. He had not verified it because Walter had not wanted verification while he was alive, and Isaac had not known how to want different things than Walter wanted. He went to the driver's side, opened the glove box, and removed the logbook. He set it in Adrian's hands without speaking. Adrian opened it, looked at the first page, the handwriting he had last seen in a garage in Charlotte in 1989, and did not say anything for a full 10 seconds. Adrian turned to a page near the middle and read aloud without asking. The entry was dated January 31, 1987, 2 days before Daytona. The ink had faded to a dusty blue, but the handwriting was precise in the way Walter Finch had always been precise about things he considered worth precision. Final valve check at 11 p.m. Isaac stayed until 2 in the morning. Nobody asked him to. Kid hears things I don't hear anymore. If the car runs wrong, send him in first. The garage was quiet after that. Cameron looked at Isaac. He never said that about anyone else on the team. The whole crew knew he had a private student. Nobody knew it was you. This was the part of the story that had never appeared in any catalog or race record or industry profile, the part that existed only in the logbook and in the memory of the two men who had driven from out of state to a small garage on a 2-lane road. Isaac had been 19 when Walter Finch first put a wrench in his hand and told him to listen to the engine before touching it. He had not been hired. He had shown up at a shop Walter used for off-season work, stood at the edge of a workspace watching for 20 minutes before Walter noticed him, and Walter had not told him to leave. That was how it started, and it was also, in some sense, how everything that followed started. He had worked alongside Walter for the last 2 seasons of the championship campaign, not as crew, not on the payroll, not in any official capacity. Walter had wanted to protect the arrangement from the machinery of the sport, which had a tendency to formalize things until the thing itself disappeared. Isaac had understood this at 19 and had not needed to reconsider it later. In 2015, Walter's illness became serious. Isaac had 2 offers that year, one from a vintage preparation team in Florida, one from a restoration house in Nashville with a real reputation. He had declined both. Not under pressure, not after deliberation. He had thought about it for an afternoon and called back with his answer, and he had not spent years second-guessing it. He stayed, and when Walter died in November of 2019, he drove the Corvette from Charlotte to Richmond in a rented trailer and put it in the corner of his garage and kept running his shop. Diana had not moved for several minutes. She was standing near the workbench with her hands at her sides and her tablet face down on the surface, listening in the way people listen when they understand they are hearing something they cannot put back. She looked at Isaac, not the way she had looked at him when she arrived, as a variable in a transaction, but the way you look at a person you've had to revise your understanding of entirely. Isaac said, "I'm not selling this car to Apex at any number they put on a page," Cameron said. "We didn't come here to buy it. Next week there's a Concours d'Elegance, the racing heritage class. This car belongs there, with the right name attached to it." Isaac turned to look at the car. The same car he had looked at every morning for years, unchanged, under the same tarp, in the same corner. He said, "Whose name?" Cameron said. "Walter Finch built it. Your name goes on it as the keeper." Before Isaac could answer, a car pulled up outside. The engine note was heavier than Diana's sedan, a larger displacement, a car that cost enough to have a sound of its own. Jason Brandt stepped into the garage wearing a suit that cost more than 3 months of back rent. He was 50, lean in the way that men who work at being lean are lean, with a watch on his left wrist that Diana recognized from a distance and which told her why he had driven here himself rather than waiting for her report. He had been watching her location through the company device and had seen her stay past 2 hours, and had come to close it personally. He saw Cameron read before he had fully entered the room, and his face did what faces do when they encounter a calculation that was not in the original plan. 1 second of pure assessment before the professional expression came back down over it like a shade. He crossed the floor with his hand extended and said Cameron's name with the warmth of a man who has practiced warmth until it runs automatically. Cameron put his hands in his pockets. Jason adjusted without pause, turning to address the room. Given the additional context now present, Apex was absolutely open to revisiting the initial assessment figure. It had been, he said carefully, a preliminary estimate based on incomplete information. Adrian, without looking up from the logbook, said, "What was the complete information?" Jason moved past the question toward Isaac. The number he offered was 50,000. Then, without waiting, 80,000, both figures in the same breath, offered the way a man offers them when he knows the gap between them and the real number is so wide that the specifics barely matter. The escalation was visible, it told its own story. Jason read Isaac's silence as negotiating posture and stepped toward it. He lowered his voice slightly, shifting from professional to pragmatic, almost collegial. "Let's be realistic, Isaac, you're 3 months behind on this space. I can make that problem disappear with 1 check. This is business. It's not personal." Cameron turned his head. Diana looked at the floor and then made herself look up. It was the wrong sentence to say to the wrong man. Jason was accustomed to people whose resistance came from wanting more money, and he was good at that conversation. He was less prepared for what Isaac's silence actually was, which was not resistance and not leverage and not an opening position. It was the patience of someone who had already decided and was simply waiting for the other person to finish. Isaac walked to the workbench. He opened the shallow center drawer and removed a white envelope. He set it on the surface in front of Jason without handing it to him. 3 months of rent in cash. The exact amount counted and sealed and prepared before Diana had arrived that morning. He said, "I don't need you to solve my problems." The envelope sat on the workbench between them. Jason looked at it with an expression that took a moment to resolve into something recognizable. The look of a person who has built a structure on a specific assumption and is watching that assumption fail in real time. Isaac spoke without raising his voice. He said he had known about the research Apex commissioned through the broker in Atlanta. He had been told 3 weeks before Diana's first visit by an acquaintance in the vintage market who had been approached for background information, declined and then called Isaac instead. He had known why the $700 figure existed, not as an offer but as a psychological instrument, something designed to sit in his mind alongside the rent he owed and accumulate pressure until pressure became necessity. The plan was to wait for the moment when he appeared to have no other visible option. The envelope had been prepared the week before Diana arrived. Not to prove he had money, he was not a man who thought in those terms, but because he had decided, on the day he sealed it, that whatever he chose to do with the car would never be shaped by a number on a typed sheet. The envelope was the removal of that variable. Whatever decision he made would be made on the only grounds that mattered to him. He had counted the bills at the kitchen table on a Sunday night and sealed the envelope and put it in the drawer, and he had not taken it out again until this moment. He had slept fine that week. That told him what he needed to know about the decision. Jason's expression shifted. He said, quietly, that no contract had been signed, that no one had been coerced, that the offer, whatever its strategic context, had been entirely legal. He said it the way people say technically accurate things when they have lost the argument and are retreating to defensible ground. Cameron Reed spoke then. He did not move from where he was standing, did not adjust his posture or his tone. He said, "You knew what this car was, you knew what it was worth. And you walked in here with $700. What you call that is your business." The sentence had no performance in it. That was what made it land. Adrian opened the laptop from his bag and turned the screen toward the center of the room. The auction result from 2021 was on the screen. A Corvette C3 in period race configuration, no documentation, $290,000 sold. He set the laptop on the workbench and stood back. Nothing else needed to be said to translate that number into what it meant for the car 3 feet away. Jason looked at Diana. It was not a look asking for help. It was the involuntary look of a man who expected someone to be on his side and has just discovered the geometry of the room has changed. Diana met his eyes for a moment and then looked at the Corvette. Jason walked to the door. He stopped once with his hand on the frame, seemed to consider saying something, and then walked out. The door did not slam. It closed with the ordinary sound of a heavy door catching its latch, which was somehow worse. Isaac stood beside the Corvette with one hand resting on the roof panel, not gripping it. Just resting, the way a person rests a hand on the shoulder of someone they are responsible for. He was looking at the door that had just closed, and there was nothing on his face that looked like triumph. No one spoke for a stretch after the door closed. The garage held the specific silence that comes after an acute thing has happened and before the next ordinary thing begins. Adrian set the logbook on the workbench and closed it carefully, the way you close something irreplaceable. He found a page near the center and opened it again, gently, without asking. He read aloud in a quieter voice, not with emotion performing itself, but with the restraint of a man who understood the weight of what he was reading. The entry was dated February 1, 1987, the night before Daytona. Final check done. Isaac stayed till 2 without being asked. I don't know where he came from, but I know what he can hear. If this car crosses the line first tomorrow, it's because of the hours he put in tonight that nobody paid him for and nobody asked him to count. He won't take credit. He never does. That's either a problem or the best thing about him. Maybe both. Adrian closed the logbook. The sound was very small in the quiet of the garage. Cameron looked at Isaac. The whole crew knew he had a private student. Nobody knew it was you. He kept that separate on purpose. Isaac did not answer immediately. He was looking at the Corvette in the way people look at something when they are processing its meaning rather than its appearance. Then, he kept a lot of things separate on purpose. Diana spoke without the professional composure she had arrived with, not unprofessionally, just plainly the way a person speaks when the frame they use for a situation has been removed. She said she was sorry about the 700. She had run the comps she was given and filled in the paperwork she was handed and had not done the thinking she should have done about why those numbers looked the way they looked. Isaac looked at her for a moment. He said, I know you didn't know, nothing conciliatory, nothing accusatory. A statement of fact from a man who had watched her through a long morning and made a fair assessment. Then you stayed, though. Diana did not answer. She had not fully understood until he said it aloud that staying had been a decision rather than an inaction. She asked what he was going to do. He looked at Cameron. Cameron described Pebble Beach in fuller detail, the racing heritage class, the significance of bringing a car like this into a room where the people who understood it best could see it properly. Not a sale, a record being set straight in the most appropriate setting available, Isaac said. And after that, Cameron said, after that is entirely yours. The afternoon light had shifted while they were talking and now came through the high horizontal windows at a lower angle, reaching the side of the Corvette. The faded red paint caught it and for a moment looked less faded, the way old paint sometimes does at a particular hour, not restored but seen differently. The same color it had always been and just now lit right. Isaac said, all right. 2 weeks later, the garage was unchanged in the ways that mattered. The Mustang had been finished and returned. A new project had come in, a 1972 Cutlass with a seized rear caliper and a carburetor assembled wrong, and Isaac was working it in the front bay with the same unhurried attention he applied to everything. The gray tarp was folded on a storage shelf beside the air compressor neatly, the way Isaac folded things. He had spent the previous 4 days preparing the Corvette for transport. Not restoring it, he had not touched the paint, had not addressed the oxidation on the chrome, had not replaced or refinished a single surface. He had cleaned it deeply and carefully, the way you clean something when you want to see exactly what it is rather than improve on it. He had used cotton cloths in the same compound he kept for detail work on other people's vehicles, and he had worked methodically from the roof down, section by section, the way a restorer would, except that everything a restorer would have then corrected, Isaac left exactly where he found it. The crack in the passenger window was still there. The split in the driver's seat was still there. The scratches along the right quarter panel, 3 parallel marks at an angle, acquired at Road America in August of 1987 according to a logbook entry in blue ink, were still there, and Isaac had cleaned around them with the same care he applied to everything else, making them more visible, not less. Diana arrived on a Tuesday morning without calling ahead. Not in the navy blazer, a jacket over a gray shirt, no tablet, no portfolio, one fold. She had submitted her resignation the previous week, she said, without being asked. She was writing the story of the car for a magazine, serious editorial coverage, the kind read by the people in the rooms where this car's value would ultimately be understood. Not the auction story, the real one. Isaac said there was one condition. She said she had assumed so. He said Walter Finch's name had to be the first thing in the piece. Diana said that was why she was writing it. The consequence of Jason Brandt's visit did not appear in any formal announcement. It moved the way things move in small, specific worlds, through phone calls between collectors, through email chains among the people who ran serious auctions on the eastern seaboard, through the kind of information that does not require a press release because the people it concerns are already in the same room. 3 long-term consulting relationships with Apex Motor Group were quietly ended in the week following his visit to the garage. An internal review had been opened, not for the $700 offer, which could be defended on paper, but for a pattern the offer had made visible. It was not the first time a number had been chosen for pressure rather than for accuracy. Isaac received one more item in the mail that week, a card-sized envelope with a Charlotte postmark, no return address, and inside it a photograph he had never seen, himself at 19, standing beside Walter Finch in a garage that no longer existed, both looking into an engine bay, the Corvette's red paint visible at the edge of the frame on the back, in the handwriting he knew better than his own. This kid's going to do things I don't have time left to do. Isaac looked at it for a long time. Then he put it in his wallet behind his driver's license, where he would not have to look at it unless he chose to. The morning of the transport was early. Richmond in September before 6 has a specific quality of light, low and diffuse, coming in from the east through a haze that burns off by mid-morning, turning everything it reaches a pale amber. The garage on the 2-lane road caught it through the high south windows and laid it across the floor in long rectangles. Isaac was already at the workbench when Diana arrived, a wrench in his hand and nothing in particular to turn it on, the way a person holds a familiar tool when they are thinking rather than working. The tarp was folded on the shelf where he had put it 2 weeks before, and the Corvette stood uncovered in the corner under the full light of the shop lamps, visible in a way it had not been for 8 years. It looked exactly like what it was, a car built to do something specific which had done it, and had then been kept in the same condition in which it completed that thing. Diana set the first draft of the piece on the workbench. Isaac did not pick it up. He looked at the first line from where he stood, read it, and nodded once. Walter Finch's name was there first, as they had agreed. The transport truck arrived at 7:15. 2 men stepped out. Isaac met them at the door and walked them through the procedure before they touched anything. The correct direction to approach the front wheels, how to place the ramp, the anchor points on the frame, the tension on the straps, the specific load sequence for a car this age, and the fact that the hood was not to be opened by anyone other than him or Adrian Cole. They listened without questions. When he finished, they got to work. Isaac watched the first man run the ramp out and gave a single nod when the angle looked right. Isaac drove the car onto the trailer himself. Slowly, precisely the way he did everything, and when the engine note dropped as he set the brake, it was the last time that engine would run, before the Pebble Beach paddock. He stepped out, ran both hands along the roof panel once from front to rear, and walked back down the ramp. Diana was standing at the edge of the open door while the men finished securing the trailer. She said he would have been proud. Isaac was watching the men work the final strap into place. He let the sentence settle the way he let most things settle before responding to them. He waited until the gate was secured and the chains were set, then, still looking at the shape of the car through the trailer's side window. I know, the truck pulled out and turned onto the road and was gone past the curve of the tree line within a minute. The garage behind Isaac was open to the morning air, emptier than it had been for years, and the early light came all the way through it now from door to back wall without anything to interrupt it. He stood at the threshold with the wrench still in his hand and looked at the road for a while.